The moving truck pulled away from the curb, leaving behind a front lawn scattered with boxes yet to be unpacked. James Wilson stood on the porch of his new home, a handsome two-story colonial with dark green shutters in the prestigious Oak Hills neighborhood. He wiped sweat from his brow and took a deep breath, still not quite believing this house was now theirs. "Honey, where do you want the family photos?" His wife Tanya called from inside, her voice echoing through the half-empty rooms. "Put them in the living room for now," James answered, stepping back inside. Their two children, 12-year-old Anthony and 8-year-old Zoe, were exploring the backyard, their excited voices carrying through the open windows. 3 weeks ago, James had been appointed as the city's first black police chief after 20 dedicated years on the force. The promotion came with a significant pay raise, allowing the family to move from their modest home in the east side to this upscale neighborhood where the lawns were perfectly manicured and luxury cars filled most driveways. "Dad, come see!" Zoe shouted from the backyard. James made his way through boxes in the kitchen and stepped onto the back deck. Their yard was spacious, with tall oak trees providing dappled shade over a lush green lawn. A brick patio housed a built-in fire pit, and there was plenty of space for the kids to play. "This yard is perfect," James said, joining his children. "What do you think about hosting a BBQ this weekend? We could invite some neighbors, my colleagues from work. It might be a good way to meet everyone." "Can we set up the basketball hoop?" Anthony asked, already eyeing the perfect spot near the garage. "Sure thing, buddy. We'll get everything set up." That evening, as the family sat among unpacked boxes eating pizza on paper plates, they discussed plans for their housewarming BBQ. "I can make my potato salad," Tanya offered. As a hospital administrator, she rarely had time to cook elaborate meals, but her potato salad was legendary at family gatherings. "And your famous ribs?" James asked hopefully. "Of course. Can't have a BBQ without them," she replied with a smile. "Should we invite the neighbors? I haven't met any of them yet." "I saw a couple people watching us move in, but nobody came over to say hello," James said, trying not to read too much into it. He had faced enough prejudice in his career to know what it might mean, but he preferred giving people the benefit of the doubt. "Let's make some invitations tomorrow. Zoe can help design them." The next morning, Zoe sat at the kitchen table carefully decorating invitation cards with colorful markers. "BBQ at the Wilsons," she wrote in careful letters, adding drawings of hamburgers and smiling stick figures. "These look great, sweetie," Tanya said, admiring her daughter's work. "Let's deliver them together after lunch." James spent the morning assembling outdoor furniture and setting up the new grill he'd purchased as a gift to himself after the promotion. The sleek stainless steel model had all the features he'd dreamed about during years of making do with a small charcoal kettle. He stood back admiring it with pride. "That's quite a serious cooking machine," came a voice from over the fence. James turned to see an older man with white hair watching him. "Hey there," James said, walking over with an extended hand. "I'm James Wilson. We just moved in." The man hesitated briefly before shaking James's hand. "Harold Brennan. Welcome to Oak Hills." His smile seemed forced, his eyes evaluating rather than welcoming. "We're having a little BBQ this Saturday afternoon. Nothing fancy, just a chance to meet some neighbors and friends. You and your family are welcome to join us," James offered. "I'll check our calendar," Harold replied noncommittally. "The neighborhood association is pretty strict about noise and such. Party permits are required for gatherings over 20 people. James nodded, maintaining his friendly expression despite the thinly veiled warning. "Good to know. We're keeping it small. Just a casual get-together. I appreciate the heads up." Later that afternoon, Tanya and the kids walked around the neighborhood delivering invitations. Some doors opened to friendly faces, others to cool, distant greetings. A few neighbors didn't answer at all, though curtains moved as they walked away. "Mom, why did that lady look at us like that?" Zoe asked after one particularly uncomfortable encounter. Tanya squeezed her daughter's hand. "Some people take time to warm up to new neighbors, sweetheart. Don't worry about it." By Saturday morning, only 3 neighbors had RSVP'd, all with polite excuses about prior commitments. James tried not to feel disappointed as he marinated chicken and prepared his special dry rub for ribs. "Don't worry about the neighbors," Tanya said, reading his expression as she chopped vegetables for salad. "Your friends from the department are coming and my sister's family." "It'll be fun," James nodded, pushing away his concerns. "You're right. Their loss if they miss your cooking." By 3 o'clock, the backyard was transformed. Streamers hung between trees. A table was loaded with food and music played softly from outdoor speakers. The smell of smoking meat filled the air as James tended the grill with expert attention. The first guests to arrive were James's longtime partner from his detective days, Rick Chen, and his wife May. "Chief Wilson," Rick called out with a grin, carrying a cooler of drinks. "Still can't believe I have to salute you now." James laughed, embracing his friend. "Only at work. Here, I'm just the guy burning the burgers." More guests arrived, officers James had worked with for years and their families. Tanya's sister Linda with her husband and teenage sons, and a couple of doctors Tanya knew from the hospital. To James's surprise, one neighbor family did show up, the Patels from 2 doors down, bringing a dish of homemade samosas that quickly became a hit with everyone. "Congratulations on your promotion," Mrs. Patel said warmly. "My husband works for the city planning department. We've heard wonderful things about your community outreach programs." As the afternoon progressed, the party hit its stride. Children played tag across the lawn, adults gathered in conversational clusters, and James manned the grill, occasionally stealing glances at the neighboring houses where curtains sometimes moved, but doors remained closed. Across the street, and 3 houses down, Diana Lawson stood at her living room window, phone in hand. The noise wasn't excessive. She could barely hear the music from inside her house, but the cars parked along the street irritated her. She'd watched the Black family move in last week and had immediately joined the neighborhood text group to discuss property values and neighborhood character. She took photos of the gathering, zooming in on people holding drinks, the children running around, the smoke rising from the grill. She'd already called the neighborhood association president twice. Back at the party, James was serving up his perfectly grilled ribs when he noticed a patrol car rolling slowly down the street. He recognized it immediately, one of his own department's vehicles. The car stopped in front of his house and 2 officers stepped out, looking uncomfortable. "Everything okay, officers?" James called from the yard, setting down his tongs and wiping his hands on his King of the Grill apron. The younger officer, Officer Thompson, looked startled to see him. "Chief Wilson? We got a call about a disturbance at this address." James's smile remained fixed, though his eyes registered understanding. He'd been a police officer long enough to recognize what was happening. Someone had seen a Black family having a gathering and decided it required police intervention. "As you can see, just a family BBQ," James said calmly, gesturing to the yard full of guests. "Would you like a plate? Tanya makes the best potato salad in the state." The officers exchanged glances, clearly embarrassed. The older officer, Sergeant Reynolds, stepped forward. "Sorry to interrupt, Chief. Looks like a lovely gathering. We'll let dispatch know it was a false alarm." "Before you go," James said quietly, stepping closer, "who called it in?" Reynolds hesitated before answering. "A Ms. Lawson. Complained about noise, parking violations, and unauthorized gathering." James nodded, taking in the information without revealing his thoughts. "Thank you for responding. I appreciate you checking it out personally." As the officers left, Tanya approached, concern in her eyes. "Everything okay?" "Just fine," James assured her, though they both knew what had happened. "Let's enjoy our party." He returned to the grill, determined not to let the incident spoil their celebration. This was their home now, their neighborhood, and if some neighbors needed time to adjust to that reality, so be it. He had faced challenges his entire career. Becoming the city's first Black police chief hadn't been easy, and he wasn't about to let this one dampen his family's joy. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across their new backyard filled with laughter and conversation, James caught Tanya's eye across the crowd and smiled. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together with dignity and strength. This was just the beginning of their new chapter. Diana Lawson paced in her living room, phone clutched tightly in her hand. The patrol car had come and gone, but the party across the street continued. She peered through her blinds, watching as the officers left without shutting down the gathering. Her neighborhood text group buzzed with new messages. "They're still going," she typed furiously. "Police didn't do anything." Harold Brennan, the neighborhood association president, replied quickly, "What exactly are they doing that's against regulations?" Diana huffed. How could she explain the feeling in her gut that these people didn't belong here, that their presence somehow threatened everything she valued about Oak Hills? Parking violations, noise, smoke from the grill blowing into my yard. There must be at least 20 people there, and Harold, You told me that requires a permit. She watched the screen as 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, Harold responded, "I'll drive by and assess the situation." Diana nodded to herself. Harold would handle it. He'd been president of the neighborhood association for 6 years and took great pride in maintaining property values and the character of Oak Hills. Back at the Wilson home, the BBQ was in full swing. James flipped burgers while chatting with Rick Chen about the upcoming community policing initiative he planned to implement as chief. "It's all about building trust," James explained. "Having officers walk neighborhoods, know people by name, understand community concerns before they become problems." Rick nodded. "Makes sense. Hard to implement with budget constraints, though." "That's why we start small," James said. "One neighborhood at a time." Tanya approached with a concerned expression. "Honey, that man is taking pictures of our house." James looked up to see Harold Brennan standing near the street, not even attempting to hide as he photographed their property and guests with his phone. "I'll handle it," James said quietly, handing the spatula to Rick. He walked toward the street, maintaining a friendly expression despite the tension building in his shoulders. "Mr. Brennan," he called out, "would you like to join us? There's plenty of food." Harold lowered his phone, caught in the act but unashamed. "Just documenting potential violations for the association records, Mr. Wilson." "Several neighbors have expressed concerns." James stepped closer, keeping his voice level. "I understand maintaining neighborhood standards is important. If there are specific concerns, I'm happy to address them. But photographing my family and guests without permission feels invasive." Harold's thin lips pressed together. "This is a public street. I'm well within my rights." "Legally, yes," James agreed. "But as neighbors, I'd hope we could discuss any issues directly." "What specific violations are you concerned about?" Harold glanced around, clearly searching for something to cite. "Your guests are blocking the Andersons' driveway." James looked where he pointed. "I see the issue. I'll have that car moved immediately." He turned toward the yard. "Rick, is that your SUV? It needs to be moved." Rick jogged over, keys in hand, and quickly repositioned his vehicle. "Any other concerns I can address?" James asked, his voice professional but firm. Harold hesitated. "The noise level is excessive," James nodded thoughtfully. "I appreciate that feedback. We'll turn down the music. Anything else?" Put on the spot and finding his complaints addressed promptly, Harold seemed momentarily at a loss. "Just keep it wrapped up by 9. Noise ordinance goes into effect then." "Of course. We plan to finish by 8 anyway. The kids have school tomorrow." James extended his hand. "Thanks for bringing these concerns to me directly. Open communication makes for better neighbors." Harold reluctantly shook James's hand, muttering something about watching the situation before walking back to his own house. As James returned to the party, Tanya gave him a knowing look. "That went well." "He'll be back," James replied quietly. "But at least he knows we're reasonable." Across the street, Diana watched the exchange with growing frustration. Harold was supposed to shut down the party, not chat with them. She dialed his number immediately. "They charmed you," she accused when he answered. "That's what they do. Act all reasonable while they take over." "Diana," Harold sighed. "They addressed the parking issue immediately. The music isn't that loud. We don't have grounds to escalate this. So you're just going to let them change the whole character of this neighborhood?" Her voice rose with indignation. "Let's discuss this at the next association meeting," Harold replied. "For now, they aren't violating any actual rules." After he hung up, Diana fumed. No one seemed to understand the threat these people posed. She'd lived in Oak Hills for 17 years and had watched as neighboring communities declined when certain elements moved in. She wasn't about to let that happen here. A new text came in from Linda Maxwell down the block. "Are those police officers at that party? With their families?" Diana rushed back to the window. Looking more carefully, she realized Linda was right. Many of the guests were wearing police department t-shirts or had arrived in cars with FOP stickers. "Why would police be at their BBQ?" She texted back. "Maybe they know someone on the force," Linda replied. Diana's mind raced. This complicated things. If they had police friends, complaining about noise wouldn't work. She needed something more serious. 2 hours later, as the afternoon shifted to early evening, Diana spotted her opportunity. Several guests had brought beer and wine, and people were clearly drinking as they enjoyed the food and conversation. She quickly took photos, zooming in on glasses and bottles. She dialed 911 again, heart pounding with righteous purpose. "Emergency services, what's your emergency?" "I need to report a situation at 1422 Oak Hills Drive," Diana said, trying to sound concerned rather than vindictive. "There's a large gathering with alcohol being served, and I've observed minors present. I believe they may be allowing underage drinking." "Is this an emergency situation, ma'am?" the dispatcher asked, recognizing the address from the earlier call. "It could be," Diana insisted. "They're getting louder, and I'm worried about drunk driving in our neighborhood. There are children present." "We'll send someone to check it out," the dispatcher said, her tone neutral but noting the repeated complaints from the same caller. At the Wilson home, the party was winding down naturally. Several families with young children had already left, thanking James and Tanya for the wonderful afternoon. James was scraping down the grill while Anthony helped collect trash, and Zoe played with the Patel's young daughter on the swing set James had assembled the day before. "Successful first party in the new house," Tanya said, slipping an arm around her husband's waist. "Despite the welcome committee," James replied with a wry smile. "You handled it perfectly," she said, professional but firm. 20 years on the force teaches you a thing or two about de-escalation," James said. "Though I admit it's different when it's personal." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of another patrol car pulling up. This time, 2 different officers emerged, Sergeant Washington and Officer Rodriguez, both of whom reported directly to James in his new role as chief. "You've got to be kidding me," Tanya muttered. James squeezed her hand. "Let me handle it." The officers approached with obvious discomfort, especially when they recognized their boss. "Chief Wilson," Sergeant Washington said, removing his hat. "Sir, I apologize for the intrusion." "No need for apologies, Sergeant," James replied. "You're doing your job." "What was the complaint this time?" Officer Rodriguez cleared her throat. "An anonymous caller reported underage drinking, sir." James couldn't help but laugh. "Feel free to inspect every cup in the yard, officers. The kids are drinking lemonade. The adults have had a beer or two with their burgers, but everyone who's been drinking is staying for the bonfire or has a designated driver." The officers looked around, clearly seeing nothing concerning. Several of their own colleagues were still present. "All behaving responsibly, sir," Washington said quietly. "This is the second call from the same number today." James nodded, understanding the implication. "And department resources are being misused because of it." "Yes, sir," James considered for a moment. "Do you know which neighbor made the call?" The dispatcher didn't say, but the call came from across the street, 3 houses down. Rodriguez said. "The corner house with the white trim. Diana Lawson's house." "Thank you for the information, officers," James said formally. "I think it's time I paid Ms. Lawson a visit." "Would you like us to accompany you, sir?" Washington asked. "No, this should be a neighbor-to-neighbor conversation," James replied. "But perhaps park where your car is visible for a few minutes before responding to the next call." The officers nodded, understanding his strategy. As they returned to their patrol car, Tanya touched James's arm. "Are you sure about this? Confronting her directly might make things worse. If I don't address it now, she'll keep calling the police every time we have friends over," James said. "Better to clear the air. Besides, she needs to understand that filing false reports has consequences." Straightening his shoulders and putting on his most professional expression, James walked across the street toward the corner house, where Diana Lawson was still peering through her blinds, completely unaware that her new neighbor, the target of her complaints, was not just a homeowner having a BBQ, but the highest-ranking police officer in the city. James walked purposefully across the street, his footsteps measured and calm despite the frustration simmering beneath his professional demeanor. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns of Oak Hills. Behind him, the remaining guests at his BBQ watched curiously, conversations quieting as they sensed the significance of the moment. Diana Lawson was still peering through her blinds when the doorbell rang, startling her so badly she nearly dropped her phone. She hadn't expected anyone to approach her directly. Through the peephole, she saw James standing on her porch, hands clasped in front of him, looking every bit as composed and dignified as when he'd been working the grill earlier. For a brief moment, she considered not answering. But curiosity won out over caution. She smoothed her cardigan, took a deep breath, and opened the door just wide enough to speak through the gap. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cool and unwelcoming. "Good evening, Ms. Lawson," James replied. "I'm James Wilson from across the street. I believe we haven't been properly introduced yet." Diana didn't offer her hand or open the door wider. "I know who you are. You're having that gathering?" "Yes, a small housewarming BBQ." James nodded. "That's actually why I'm here. It seems someone has called the police twice about our event, and the officers mentioned the calls came from this address." Diana's face flushed, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "I have every right to call the police if I feel there's a disturbance in the neighborhood." "Absolutely," James agreed, his tone remaining professional. "Every citizen has that right. However, making false reports about underage drinking wastes valuable police resources and could be considered misuse of emergency services." "I saw people drinking," Diana insisted, "and there are children present." Yes, adults were responsibly enjoying beverages with their meals, and families brought their children to a family-friendly event, James explained patiently. "That's not illegal or concerning in any way. But I didn't come here to argue about the specifics of the complaints." "Then why are you here?" Diana asked, her fingers tightening on the edge of the door. "To introduce myself properly as your new neighbor," James said, "and also in my professional capacity." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet, flipping it open to reveal his badge and ID. "I'm Chief James Wilson of the City Police Department." "Those officers you called? They report to me." Diana's mouth fell open slightly, her eyes widening as she stared at the badge. The blood drained from her face so quickly that James momentarily wondered if she might faint. I didn't," she stammered. "No," James supplied. "That's why introductions are important between neighbors." Diana swallowed hard, her mind racing to process this new information. The man she'd been reporting to the police was, in fact, the head of the police department. Every call she'd made had been about her new neighbor, the police chief. "I was just concerned about the neighborhood," she managed finally, her voice smaller than before. James nodded, tucking his badge away. "I understand being vigilant about your community. That's something we both value. But there's a difference between legitimate concern and something else." He let the implication hang in the air between them. Diana's face flushed again, this time with a mix of embarrassment and indignation. "I don't know what you're suggesting," she said stiffly. "I'm not suggesting anything," James replied. "I'm simply here to clear the air and let you know that my family and I are your new neighbors. We chose Oak Hills because of its reputation for safety and community. We want to be part of that community." Diana's gaze flickered past him to where the patrol car still sat at the curb, the two officers watching the interaction from a respectful distance. "Are you threatening me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James shook his head. "Not at all. I'm introducing myself and requesting that in the future, if you have concerns about activities at my home, you come speak to me directly before involving my officers." It's what good neighbors do. Across the street, Tanya had walked to the edge of their yard, watching the interaction with concern. A few guests had already left, sensing the evening had taken an unexpected turn, but the Patels and several officers and their families remained, bearing witness to this crucial first confrontation. Diana noticed them watching and seemed to shrink slightly. "Fine, I'll keep that in mind." She started to close the door, but James gently raised his hand. "One more thing, Ms. Lawson. As police chief, part of my job is community outreach. I'm planning a neighborhood meeting next week to discuss our new community policing initiatives. It would mean a lot to have longtime residents like yourself participate." The invitation caught Diana off guard. She had expected threats or warnings, not an invitation to a community meeting. I'll think about it," she managed. "Wonderful. We'll deliver flyers with the details tomorrow," James said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Have a good evening." As James turned to walk away, Diana called after him, finding a last shred of defiance. "Your party permit. Do you have one?" James turned back. "For gatherings under 20 people, no permit is required according to the Oak Hills Neighborhood Association bylaws. Section 4, Paragraph 3. I made sure to check before planning our event." His smile widened slightly. "I'm a stickler for rules, Ms. Lawson. It's part of the job." With that, he walked back across the street, leaving Diana standing in her doorway, speechless and deflated. As James rejoined his family and remaining guests, Tanya slipped her arm through his. "How did it go?" she asked quietly. About as expected, he replied. She was surprised to learn about my job. I bet, Tanya said with a small smile. Think it'll make a difference? James watched as Diana finally closed her door, retreating into her house. Hard to say. People don't change their views overnight. But at least she knows who she's dealing with now. Officer Rodriguez approached, car keys in hand. Sir, we're heading out unless you need anything else. Thank you for responding, James said sincerely. I appreciate you both handling this professionally. Just doing our job, Chief, Washington replied. Sorry your first weekend in the new house was interrupted. Not your fault, James assured him. But I think we should talk about implementing some new protocols for how dispatch handles these types of calls. Maybe at Monday's staff meeting? Yes, sir, Rodriguez nodded. Have a good night, Chief, ma'am, she added with a respectful nod to Tanya. As the officers left, the remaining guests gathered around the fire pit that James had lit as the evening cooled. The conversation naturally turned to what had just happened. You handled that really well, Mr. Patel said, warming his hands by the fire. Not everyone would have been so calm. 20 years of police work teaches you to keep your cool, James replied. Getting angry never solves anything. Still, Rick Chen added, it takes a lot of restraint when it's personal. When it's your family being targeted. Tanya squeezed her husband's hand, knowing exactly how difficult it had been for him to remain professional, when all he'd wanted to do was protect his family from harassment. What happens next? Mrs. Patel asked. Will she leave you alone now? James gazed thoughtfully at the fire. Maybe or maybe not. People with deep-seated prejudices don't change easily. But now she knows I'm not someone she can intimidate or push around. And she knows we have friends in the neighborhood, Tanya added, smiling warmly at the Patels. And on the police force, Rick said with a laugh, raising his soda in a mock toast. As the night deepened and the conversation moved to lighter topics, James found himself thinking about Diana Lawson and what she represented. Throughout his career, he'd faced similar obstacles and prejudices. Each promotion had been accompanied by whispers and doubts. Each achievement had been scrutinized more heavily than those of his white colleagues. Moving to Oak Hills was supposed to be a reward for all that hard work, a symbol that he had finally made it. Yet here he was, still fighting the same battles, still having to prove he belonged. But as he looked around at his family and their new friends enjoying the warm glow of the fire, James felt a sense of resolve rather than discouragement. This was his home now, his neighborhood. And if Diana Lawson or anyone else had a problem with that, they would have to adjust their expectations. Not him, because Police Chief James Wilson wasn't going anywhere. 3 days after the BBQ, flyers appeared in mailboxes throughout Oak Hills announcing a community meeting. Meet your new police chief and discuss neighborhood safety, read the bold headline. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at the Oak Hills Community Center. Diana Lawson tossed the flyer into her recycling bin without reading past the headline. The encounter with James Wilson had left her humiliated and angry. She'd spent the past days replaying the conversation in her mind, thinking of all the things she should have said, how she should have stood her ground more firmly. She reached for her phone and opened the neighborhood text group. Anyone planning to attend this community meeting? She typed. Seems like a PR stunt to me. The replies came quickly. Harold, as association president, I'll be attending. I think we should all go and hear what the chief has to say. Linda Maxwell. I'm curious. Never had a police chief living in Oak Hills before. Michael Stevens. Free donuts? Count me in. Diana frowned at the responses. No one seemed to share her concerns. She tried again. I'm worried about the direction of the neighborhood. First a noisy BBQ without proper permits, now using his position to organize meetings. Feels like overstepping. Harold replied almost immediately. Diana, I checked the bylaws. Their gathering was within regulations, and community safety meetings fall under acceptable use of the community center. Diana's face flushed with frustration. She tossed her phone aside and walked to the window, looking across the street at the Wilson house. The property looked immaculate. James had spent Sunday morning meticulously cleaning up after the BBQ and mowing the lawn. There was nothing specific she could point to as a problem, which somehow made her even more frustrated. Thursday evening arrived with a light rain falling over Oak Hills. Diana debated not going to the meeting, But curiosity and a stubborn desire to monitor the situation won out. She arrived early, choosing a seat in the back corner of the room where she could observe without being obvious. To her surprise, the community center filled quickly. Nearly every household in Oak Hills was represented, along with several people she didn't recognize. The Patels sat near the front, chatting amicably with Linda Maxwell. Harold took a seat in the front row, notebook in hand. At precisely 7 o'clock, James Wilson walked in wearing his full police chief uniform. He was accompanied by several officers, including the two who had responded to Diana's calls on Saturday. Tanya Wilson and their children sat in the front row, dressed neatly and greeting neighbors with warm smiles. James approached the podium as the room quieted. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight, especially in this weather." His voice carried easily through the room, confident but approachable. "For those who don't know me yet, I'm Chief James Wilson. My family and I just moved into the neighborhood last week." He gestured to Tanya and the children, who waved. "I wanted to organize this meeting for 2 reasons. First, to introduce myself as both your new neighbor and your police chief. And second, to share some exciting new community policing initiatives we're launching in Oak Hills as a pilot program." Diana shifted uncomfortably in her seat as James outlined his vision for community policing, regular neighborhood walks by officers, youth mentoring programs, quarterly safety workshops, and a new neighborhood watch program designed to build trust between residents and law enforcement. The goal, James explained, is to create a model where police and community work together proactively, rather than just responding to emergencies. We want officers to know residents by name, understand neighborhood concerns, and be seen as partners in keeping Oak Hills safe. The presentation was compelling, and Diana could see neighbors nodding in agreement. Even Harold seemed impressed, jotting notes enthusiastically. When James opened the floor for questions, several hands went up immediately. Most questions were practical: how to volunteer, when the programs would start, what areas would be prioritized. James answered each thoughtfully, often deferring to his officers for specific details about implementation. Diana sat silently, arms crossed, until finally raising her hand. James noticed immediately. "Yes, Ms. Lawson," he acknowledged, his expression neutral. Diana stood, aware of eyes turning toward her. "This all sounds very nice, Chief Wilson, but I have concerns about resources. Our tax dollars pay for police protection. Using officers for these community programs means fewer officers responding to actual emergencies, doesn't it?" A murmur ran through the room. James nodded thoughtfully. "That's an excellent question. Actually, data shows that community policing initiatives like these reduce emergency calls over time. When officers know neighborhoods well and build relationships with residents, they can often address issues before they become emergencies." He gestured to Sergeant Washington. "Sergeant, can you share the statistics from our pilot in Riverside last year?" Washington stepped forward. "Yes, sir. After implementing similar programs in Riverside, emergency calls decreased by 22% in 6 months. Response times for genuine emergencies improved because we weren't responding to as many non-emergency situations." Diana remained standing. "And how much did this program cost taxpayers?" "The program operates within our existing budget," James explained patiently. "We're reallocating resources, not requesting additional funding." Diana wasn't satisfied. "So these officers walking around chatting with people are being paid the same as officers responding to real crimes?" The room grew uncomfortably quiet. James maintained his professional demeanor, but his gaze became more direct. "Ms. Lawson, in my 20 years of police work, I've learned that preventing crime is far more effective than responding to it. Building community trust is not a luxury or a distraction. It's essential to effective policing. And you just happened to choose Oak Hills for this experiment?" Diana pressed. "Right after moving here yourself?" The implication hung in the air. James studied her for a moment before responding. "We're implementing these programs in several neighborhoods. Oak Hills was already on the list before I purchased my home here. But yes, I'm particularly pleased to have this program in my own neighborhood. I believe in it that much." Officer Rodriguez stepped forward. "If I may add something, Chief?" James nodded, and Rodriguez turned to address the room. "Before Chief Wilson's promotion, I worked in Riverside during the pilot program. I was skeptical at first, just like some of you might be, but I saw firsthand how it transformed the community. Kids who used to run from police now wave to us. Neighbors who never spoke now look out for each other. Her sincerity was obvious, and several people nodded in response. Diana remained standing, her frustration growing as she felt the room slipping away from her viewpoint. "That's all very touching," she said sharply. "But some of us chose Oak Hills specifically for its exclusivity and privacy. These programs sound like they'll bring people from outside the neighborhood here regularly." The room fell completely silent. James's expression remained controlled, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Ms. Lawson," he said carefully, "what specific people are you concerned about coming to Oak Hills?" Diana hesitated, suddenly aware of how the question had exposed something she hadn't intended to reveal so explicitly. "I just mean people who don't live here, who don't have the same investment in maintaining the neighborhood standards." Harold Brennan cleared his throat from the front row. "Diana, I think what you're suggesting goes against the spirit of our community bylaws, which explicitly welcome visitors and community engagement." Several neighbors were now looking at Diana with uncomfortable expressions. The Patels exchanged glances, and Mrs. Patel whispered something to her husband. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward again. "Ma'am, I'd like to address another matter while we're here. We've received multiple calls from your address reporting non-emergency situations as emergencies. I want to make sure you're aware that misuse of emergency services can result in fines of up to $500 per incident." Diana's face flushed deep red. "Are you threatening me? In front of everyone?" "Not at all," Rodriguez replied calmly. "Just providing information as part of our community outreach. We want all residents to understand when it's appropriate to call 911 versus the non-emergency line." James returned to the podium. "I think we've addressed Ms. Lawson's concerns. Are there other questions about the community policing initiative?" Several more hands went up and the meeting continued, but Diana remained standing for a few moments longer, feeling the weight of disapproving glances from neighbors. Finally, she sat down, her hands trembling slightly with anger and embarrassment. By the time the meeting ended, Diana had made up her mind to leave early, avoiding further interaction. But as she tried to slip out, she found herself face to face with Tanya Wilson in the hallway. "Ms. Lawson," Tanya said, her voice quiet but firm, "I just wanted to say that I hope we can move forward as neighbors despite this difficult start." Diana stiffened. "I don't need your forgiveness or approval." "I'm not offering either," Tanya replied evenly. "Just a chance for a fresh start. My children will be growing up on your street. They'll be riding bikes past your house, playing in the same park as your grandchildren. We're going to be seeing each other for years to come." The simple truth of this statement hit Diana with unexpected force. Before she could formulate a response, Tanya continued, "The community meeting next month will be at our house. I hope you'll come. Good night, Ms. Lawson." With that, Tanya walked back toward her husband, who was surrounded by neighbors eager to continue the conversation. Diana slipped out into the rainy night, her certainties not quite as solid as they had been when she arrived. 2 weeks after the community meeting, Oak Hills buzzed with activity. The community policing initiative had launched with officers walking the neighborhood in pairs, introducing themselves to residents and handing out contact cards. James had been true to his word. The program was running in 3 neighborhoods simultaneously, with Oak Hills serving as just one of the test areas. Diana Lawson watched from her window as Officer Rodriguez chatted with the elderly couple next door, helping them carry groceries from their car. She hadn't spoken to anyone about the community meeting since that night, withdrawing from the neighborhood text group after several members had privately messaged her about her comments. Her phone rang, startling her away from the window. It was her daughter, Kate. "Mom, are you coming for dinner Sunday? The kids have been asking about you." Diana sighed. "I don't know if I'm up for it this weekend." "Mom, what's going on? You've been canceling plans for weeks now." Diana hesitated, unsure how to explain the situation without sounding like exactly what she'd revealed herself to be at the meeting. "There's been some drama in the neighborhood," she said finally. "Drama? In Oak Hills? I thought that's why you moved there. Because nothing ever happens." Kate's laugh was gentle, teasing. "We have new neighbors," Diana said, choosing her words carefully. "A family across the street. They're different from the usual Oak Hills residents." "Different how?" Kate asked, her voice suddenly cautious. Diana felt cornered. They have these loud gatherings. And the father is apparently the new police chief, so he's using his position to make changes in the neighborhood. The silence on the other end of the line stretched uncomfortably. "Mom," Kate finally said, her voice tight with disappointment. "Please tell me this isn't about what I think it's about." "I don't know what you mean," Diana replied defensively. "Are these new neighbors black?" Kate asked directly. Diana's lack of immediate response was answer enough. "Oh, Mom," Kate's voice dropped. "We've talked about this. Remember when you had problems with the Gonzalez family moving onto your old street? And it turned out they were the nicest people?" "This is different," Diana insisted, "is it? Or are you just doing what you always do, assuming the worst about people who don't look like you?" The words stung precisely because they contained truth Diana wasn't ready to acknowledge. "I need to go," she said abruptly. "I'll call you later about Sunday." After hanging up, Diana returned to her window, watching as children played in the street while Officer Rodriguez kept a watchful eye. Anthony Wilson rode by on his bike, followed by a group of neighborhood kids, including the Patel's son. They were laughing, carefree in a way that made Diana's chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. Later that afternoon, a knock at her door surprised her. She opened it to find Harold Brennan standing on her porch, a folder tucked under his arm. "Harold," she said stiffly, "what brings you by?" "Association business," he replied, his usual formality tempered by an uncharacteristic awkwardness. "May I come in?" Diana reluctantly stepped aside, leading him to her living room. "I'll be direct, Diana," Harold said once they were seated. "Your comments at the community meeting have caused concern among several residents." Diana's back straightened. "I simply raised valid questions about resource allocation." Harold shook his head. "We both know it went beyond that. The association has received 3 formal complaints about your behavior, both at the meeting and regarding the false police reports." "Complaints? About me?" Diana's voice rose in disbelief. "I've lived here for 17 years. I've been on the garden committee, the holiday planning committee." "I know," Harold interrupted. "Which is why I'm here personally rather than sending a formal letter." "Diana, you're at risk of violating our community standards clause." "That's ridiculous." "What standards have I violated?" Harold opened his folder and read directly from the bylaws. Oak Hill's residents agree to foster a community of mutual respect and civility, free from discrimination based on race, color, religion, national origin. "I haven't discriminated against anyone," Diana protested. "Your repeated targeting of the Wilson family suggests otherwise," Harold replied firmly. "The association is giving you a warning. Any further incidents could result in fines or other consequences." Diana stared at him, speechless. Harold had been her ally for years in maintaining the neighborhood's standards. Now he sat in her living room, essentially calling her a bigot. "The neighborhood is changing, Diana," Harold said more gently. "Maybe it's time we did too." After he left, Diana sat alone in her living room, the silence of her empty house pressing in around her. Kate's words echoed in her mind, alongside Harold's warning and the disappointed faces of her neighbors at the meeting. Was she wrong? The question was almost too painful to consider. The following Sunday afternoon, Diana was tending her front garden when she noticed unusual activity across the street. The Wilsons' front yard was being transformed with tables, chairs, and a large banner reading Oak Hill's Community BBQ. Neighbors were arriving with covered dishes and folding chairs. Diana ducked her head and continued weeding, determined to ignore the gathering. But as the afternoon wore on, the sounds of laughter and conversation drifted across the street. Children played games on the lawn while adults chatted in small groups. The aroma of grilled food made her stomach growl, reminding her that she'd skipped lunch. From inside her house, Diana watched the community she'd been part of for 17 years enjoying themselves without her. She recognized everyone. The Patels, the Andersons, even Harold Brennan was there, helping James set up a volleyball net. Her doorbell rang, startling her. When she opened it, she found little Zoe Wilson standing on her porch, holding a paper plate covered with aluminum foil. "Hi," the child said brightly. "My dad sent me to bring you some food. He said neighbors should look out for each other, even when they don't always get along." Diana stared at the plate, then at the little girl's open, guileless face. "Thank you," she managed to say, accepting the offering. "There's plenty more," Zoe added. "And my mom made her famous potato salad. Dad says it's the best in the whole state." Before Diana could respond, Zoe continued, "Why don't you come over? Everyone's there." "I don't think that's a good idea," Diana replied. I don't think your parents would want me there. That's not true, Zoe said with a child's straightforward honesty. Dad said specifically to invite you. He says community means everybody, not just the people you already like. The simplicity of the statement cut through Diana's defenses in a way that all the confrontations and warnings hadn't managed to do. She looked past Zoe to where James stood on his front lawn, watching the interaction from a distance. When he caught her eye, he nodded respectfully. "Let me get my shoes," Diana heard herself say. Walking across the street felt like crossing a much larger divide. Conversations quieted briefly as neighbors noticed her arrival, but James stepped forward, offering his hand. "Ms. Lawson," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I'm glad you could join us." "Thank you for the invitation," Diana replied stiffly. "And the food." "There's plenty more," James said, gesturing toward the tables laden with dishes. "Help yourself." As Diana filled a plate, she found herself approached by Mrs. Patel. "Try the samosas," the woman suggested warmly. "They're my grandmother's recipe." Slowly, awkwardly, Diana began to interact with her neighbors. No one mentioned the community meeting or her previous behavior, though she caught a few surprised glances. By the time she found herself sitting with a group of older residents discussing the neighborhood's history, some of the tension had left her shoulders. Later, as the gathering continued into early evening, Diana observed James in his element, playing with children, helping elderly residents find comfortable seating, ensuring everyone felt welcome. There was nothing threatening about him or his family, nothing that justified the fear and suspicion she'd been harboring. When it was time to leave, Diana approached Tanya, who was clearing one of the tables. "Thank you," Diana said simply. "For including me," Tanya smiled, the warmth reaching her eyes. "That's what neighbors do." "I haven't been a very good one," Diana admitted, the words difficult but necessary. "New beginnings happen every day," Tanya replied. "At least that's what I tell my students." A month later, the Oak Hills newsletter featured a front-page article about the success of the community policing initiative. Crime reports were down and neighbor-to-neighbor interaction was up. The article included a photo of Officer Rodriguez helping Diana Lawson carry groceries from her car, something that had become a regular occurrence since Diana had sprained her ankle gardening. The transformation wasn't immediate or complete. Diana still sometimes caught herself having reflexive thoughts she needed to correct. But she'd started attending the monthly community BBQs at the Wilson home and had even volunteered to help with Zoe's school fundraiser. Small steps on a long journey. One Saturday morning, as Diana watered her front garden, she watched James teaching a group of neighborhood children, including Anthony, how to throw a proper football spiral on their front lawn. When one of the kids overthrew the ball and it landed near her driveway, Diana picked it up and, after only a moment's hesitation, walked it across the street. "Nice arm on that one," she commented, handing the ball to the boy who'd thrown it. "Thanks, Ms. Lawson," he replied with a smile. "Want to join us? Chief Wilson is teaching us plays." Diana glanced at James, who nodded encouragingly. "Maybe just for a few minutes," she said, surprised to find she meant it. As she joined the circle of children, Diana caught sight of Tanya watching from the porch, coffee cup in hand. The two women exchanged a small smile. Not the smile of friends exactly, but of neighbors who had found a way to share the same street with mutual respect. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale ending where everyone suddenly abandoned their prejudices overnight, but it was progress. Real, meaningful progress that rippled outward as Oak Hills became a model for the kind of community policing that James had envisioned. Sometimes transformation happens in grand, sweeping gestures, but more often it happens